Thanks, Tony. Good afternoon, everyone from New York. Um, Monica Seekand. I'm an RPIC member and one of the co-leader with the Early Career Community of Practice. I am an atmospheric physicist and also a faculty at City University of New York. And on behalf of Early Career Community of Practice, I am excited to welcome Dr. Myella Leiba. Dr. Leiba is an award-winning author, business entrepreneur, and modern leader celebrated for her achievements in technology and leadership. She is honored with the Women of Color in Technology Rising Star Award and the Black Engineer of the Year Modern Day Technology Leader Award. She brings exceptional expertise and a passion for transformation to every endeavor. Dr. Leiba's academic excellence lays a strong foundation for her visionary leadership. She holds a Bachelor's of Science in Civil and Environmental Engineering from the University of Michigan, Master's of Liberal Arts in Management from Harvard University Extension, and a Doctorate of Education in Organizational Change and Leadership from University of Southern California. Her research focuses on the value minority executive leaders bring to STEM corporations. Additionally, she has certifications in leadership at all levels and systems architecture from MIT and Harvard University. Through Strive for Impact LLC and a passion for empowering others, Dr. Leiba continues to advance organizations inspired to leave a lasting impact that transform lives. Dr. Leiba, welcome, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. We're going to have an exciting session together. We have about 30 to 45 minutes-ish that I was given. So we'll have some discussions and we'll have some activities that we can do together to transform what we're thinking about as our past, present, and future together. So thank you for having me. Monica does know I have a background as well in sustainability. We were close in the sustainability activity before, so I have a true passion around sustainability and what we're doing at our RPIC going forward. So thank you again for having me and giving me your time. Okay, so I wanted to go through our journey today, so lay a foundation of how we will go through this and what activities we'll have, and we'll have a conversation around everything that's happening for transforming our impact and transforming our lives. I'll go through the introduction and why we're here. You're probably interested in why am I here, why am I attending the session? And we'll go through some Buff and Burner models and activities. All of our session is based on research and activities and conversations and documentation of what's happening in our lives and how we layer this as a foundation to growth and future activities. And that's where cultural wealth comes in. We'll go through some activities around cultural wealth and how we can use cultural wealth to execute and go forward. And then, of course, as we have a session, there's no reason to have a session unless you have a call for impact and a call for action and the way in which you will change going forward. Since we only have 30 to 45 minutes, we might not go through the call of action together, but it might be activities or homework that you take and you think about, ruminate on, and do in the future when you have time. Any questions before we begin? Okay, awesome. I saw you shake your head, Sahara, so thank you. At least I can see one person. And then there is a companion journal. Tony was wonderful enough to add it to our meeting notice. It will be sent again as we need the companion journal on site 3 or 4-ish. So just for awareness, there's a companion journal. And the reason there's a companion journal, most of us are professors, most of us have a background in education. And these are two of my favorite thoughts as we move forward. It says, tell me, and I forget, teach me, and I remember, involve me, and I learn. And that comes from Benjamin Franklin. So really it's around doing, getting involved, having a conversation so we could all learn from each other and so we can learn going forward together. And then the thoughts I have plans, well, I know the plans I have for you and the plans to prosper and to give you hope in the future is one of my favorite texts. So I just wanted to share that as well. Today's session is based on research and tested frameworks to guide today's activities. We'll go through some internal models, again, cultural wealth, and then really talking around leadership attributes and leadership abilities based on what we've learned in the past, present, and future. This really is around empowering ourselves and our students and the ones in which we come in contact with to transform and to develop greatness and succeed today and really always as we move forward, especially as we're early careers and we're starting out in our career. how we impact others and how we think about and impact ourselves going forward. By the end of this session today, you'll understand the foundation system shaping development. You'll explore cultural wealth possessed within. So we'll go through cultural wealth. We'll examine our own winning capabilities, and then we will develop action-oriented plans for embracing our unique strengths. And again, as time permits, we'll get to the last one. So just wanted to recap again what we'll go and talk through today and activities we'll go through. Okay, so we have our first activity. You don't need the companion journal as yet for this activity. Really, I want you to take a piece of paper or on your notepad, if you use a computer for your notepad, really reflect and capture 5 things that have impacted who you are today. So think through 5 things in your life that have really impacted who you are and who you show up as you are today. And you will have around 4 minutes for this activity. So I'm going to start the timer. And if we need more time, we'll have more time. So don't think the timer is going down. So as we need more time, we'll have more time. Really reflect and capture 5 things that have impacted who you are today. So we are about halfway there. No rush. If you don't do all 5, it's not a big deal. I will give teammates the opportunity to share with each other out loud what things might have impacted where you are and where you have gotten to where you are today. And you don't need to share all 5, just 1 or 2 is fine enough. Okay, so I think most of us are finished. If you are finished, can you give me a thumbs up at least so I know I can see? Okay, I see 2 thumbs up. If you want to use the, what is it, the feature, the reaction feature.
Reaction.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. I saw some. Okay, awesome. Thank you. So about most everyone is finished now, so we can start. So from a sharing perspective, is anyone willing to share some of the things that have impacted who you are today? And you can raise your hand, and Tony will take you off mute.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and pause the recording now if that makes folks feel more comfortable.
From a development perspective and execution perspective, we have Brofenberner developed a model, and we love models. Most of us have a background in how models are structured and how models affect who we are and everything in our life. So Brofenberner developed a model that talked through, from a development perspective, there's the individual part of development, which is your internal thoughts and beliefs. And then share that. Tracy's the one who mentioned this. You mentioned your internal thoughts and beliefs and how you thought impacted who you are today. So that falls directly into individual and what we think or believe. And then our microsystem is really, and from a concentric perspective, is really around our families. And a few persons talked about their family and how their family have impacted who you are today. and then your peers, your neighbors, and your affiliations, your religious organizations, and then your workplace really affects who you are and how you develop and how you grow and how you relate to people and the things that you bring into your workplace or your organization. So today, I pick. From a mesosystem perspective, these are the internal links between your microsystem elements. So how your family and your peers interact is part of your mesosystem. You might have a family network that is very strong. You have a very strong community with your family and your peers with your family as well. If you live in a neighborhood that everyone was around each other all the time, that's usually the case. And that goes into the neighborhood. And your affiliation in religious organizations like Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, those things impact from a microsystem perspective, how we internalize activities and how we move forward. And the exosystem development is really around the economic structure or political, educational, religious, government, and social systems. So really thinking through how the economics impact what we're going through right now from the stock market exchange and everything that's happening there really impacts how we will develop and grow, or anyone we interact with will grow. From our political landscape right now, that really will have an impact on how we develop and grow and how we think about our past, our present, and our future. And in our education system, some of us have PhDs. I think everyone here might have a PhD or some doctorate to some extent. So that really has structured how you've developed and how you move forward. And then from a macro system perspective, this is really around your overarching values and beliefs and your attitudes and ideology and culture. So how we think about our values and beliefs based on what we've been through, based on how we've developed, that's really about the macro system. And I'll go through some examples in one moment. So we'll go through some examples in a second. And our current system, the time and events, so really around what's happening from a time perspective, were you part of the Great Depression, were you part of the stock market crash in 2008, were you part in the housing market crash around that time, were you part in the booms when you had plentiful, that's really has developed how we developed, how we grow, how we move forward. So Broff and Brennan developed this model around our development and our structure in which we have developed from an execution perspective. So some examples, what we've seen in research and from a execution perspective, there is the development of stereotype threats, self-perception, self-efficacy. And I bring this forward from IRPIC specifically for early career development. When we think about stereotype threat, there were activities and research that showed that based on what teammates thought of themselves, based on what people thought of themselves, actually impacts how you show up and how you execute in your space. And they did a research model that showed that if you put women into a room and they were surrounded by posters of different people from themselves, they did worse on math tests. And they showed that this over and over again. Whereas if you put women on the wall that showed how successful women while they did this test, they scored much higher. So that really impacts from an individual perspective how we think about ourselves and how we execute. They also did the flip where they put white males in a basketball tournament. And if they had Black males around them, they did worse because naturally we believed we could not do as well. So whenever we show up in this space, we just have to think about what are our internal thoughts, what are our internal beliefs about the space, and really think about how we overcome those thoughts and beliefs. And then from a microsystems perspective, I bring this forward again. Someone mentioned role models, actually. I want to say it's Sahara. Did you mention role models? If not, someone else mentioned role models.
I mentioned mentors.
Yes, mentors. Yes, thank you. Mentors, and really having the impact of these mentors on our lives and our execution. And that goes into role models as well. People we can look up to and people we can learn from, really have an impact on how we develop and grow and how we show up in our spaces. And a sense of belonging. How do we feel when we are actually executing? Do we feel like we belong? Do we feel like we don't belong? There's much research that shows how that impacts how we show up and how we execute and how we grow and how we learn. So really thinking about how we overcome these activities and how we move forward in executing. And then from an exosystem perspective, our culture and our religion really has an impact on, I'm from the Caribbean, so our Caribbean culture is very different. And you might hear accent when I speak because I grew up in the Caribbean, but our system of culture is different than some other places in the world. So that really impacts what I think about and how I interact with others. And then from a macro system perspective, we have these positionality factors of gender, race, ability, and we could go through the list of positionality factors that show up that really impacts our spaces and how we activities on which we execute. And then the last one, as I mentioned, from time and events, our technology boom, our housing crisis, what is happening in the space really impacts our base foundation of our development and how we will execute as we move forward. And this will layer into our second activity. But before we get to our second activity, I do want to give you some time to reflect on your new knowledge around the Brockman-Bennett model and how you think about others, how you think about how you show up in your spaces, how do you think about your development. And there is a space in the journal on page 5. There will be space in the journal on page 5 if you want to capture like how your different elements show up and any reflections that you have. And I'll give you an opportunity to share, but don't feel like you have to share. And I would never call on anyone to share, but just I'm going to give you a moment to just reflect. So for 2 or 3 minutes, I'll give you a moment to reflect.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yes,
The
go ahead.
reflection is on the pieces that you just shared and how that, like, maybe.
Impacts.
Okay. That's how we think. Cool.
And I mentioned this in the chat, but if anybody would like the companion journal and is not currently a member of IARPIC Collaborations and can't access that link that I put in the chat, you can send me a message in the chat privately if you want, but with your email address, and I can email you a copy. And sorry, one more thing for me. I don't know if would it be helpful for folks if we like toggled back to the previous slide for a moment?
It's in the journal as well.
Okay.
It might be helpful. So I can definitely toggle back for those people who don't have. So thank you, Tony. I'll toggle back. If you suggested it, then someone else was thinking it as well. So thank you. So I want to give a moment to anyone who wants to share. And usually, typically, what I've heard in the past is, oh, I realized that a lot of my impacts have been from maybe my microsystem and really around how my family has impacted me. A lot of my activities fall in that space or the individual space or something else that this is just an opportunity for you to share if you so feel. Does anyone want to share? From a cultural, sorry. From a cultural wealth perspective, there are some types of capital. And so now you've known some of the foundations in which you've developed and grow. There are some types of capital based on Yasu's research. She did research that showed there are 5 or 6 types of cultural wealth as we develop and grow. So cultural wealth is interchangeable with capital, so just from awareness of the perspective. So resistance capital is really around how we've developed and grown the enjoyment of challenges and resistance and execution. So you see this a lot in individuals who have been through a tougher life and they've been through lots of different challenges. You see them come out with saying that I have been through this and I'm able to resist this. It's really around the creation of skills and knowledge because you've gone through an accredited to succeed. And really, it's really around resistance of stereotypes and the impact of stereotypes in our system. There are also some wealth that other teammates have developed from a navigational and aspirational capital perspective. So when we look at navigational and aspirational capital, some of the individuals you have developed being able to maneuver different spaces. Someone mentioned they grew up in an international space. And because you have this knowledge and this impact of international barriers, international things that are happening, and you now live in the US, you understand how it is to navigate different systems because of that background and execution. really, this is really also around persistence and determination in navigational spaces, being able to navigate through different social systems or different political systems based on where you are, and being able to navigate different elements of life. And then there's also the aspirational capital that some of us develop because we have aspirations for something in the future. We have aspirations for something that's higher, especially as an early career development within our spaces, or even ones who are older in your development and your execution, you have aspirations for something higher than where you are today. So that you see that often in individuals moving forward in execution. And then from a linguistics capital perspective, you also think through what you have linguistic exchanges shaping intellectual and social skills. So when you see these individuals, they have lots of capital in how they maneuver systems based on how they can talk to different individuals, based on being able to maneuver in multi-languages, in communication ability, being able to have really strong storytelling traditions, really strongly communicate in business acumen because of the different spaces and the development and growth that they've been through. And the last thing that the research have shown from a social capital perspective, and this is the one that's not often thought of in terms of actually having capital, but is part of the capital that individuals bring forward. It's really using your community resources. And we hear this often as networking, but it is part of the way in which you develop and grow and the way in which you execute and go ahead from an execution perspective in our different spaces, building those connections, building that social network and that capital. You're having mentors and sponsorships in different roles. That builds your social capital and the aspect of what your foundation has developed you to move forward. So really thinking through how the social aspects are going to help you in your future, especially as you go through, and this is what often happens from early career perspective. Often we don't understand as much from a social capital perspective, how your connections help develop that network to help you propel you to where you want to go in the future. So as you think through where do you want to go, where you want to execute, and really think through what capital you bring to different systems based on your development and growth. Any questions here? Someone came off mute. Do you have a question? Or no? Okay, maybe not. And this is an example I love going back to of one of my research participants is she said, I'm going to break the glass ceiling. I'm going to overcome. I'm going to create a path. If the door closes, I'm going to find the window. Like there's something within us. If there's a barrier, I'll go around it. I'll jump over it. I'll go under it. And that's a clear indication of the resistant capital in which she possesses based on her development and based on where she's coming from execution and her growth. So our second activity from an exercise perspective, and this is on page 8 of your journal. So if you do have your journal, really think about where does your strength lie from a capital perspective? Where do you see yourself falling into this model? And you could have multiple different spaces. You might be very strong in social. You might be very strong in resistance. You might be very strong in linguistic. You might be very strong. They overlap a lot based on what your life has been before and based on the different spaces you've been into or you fit into. So take a moment. I have a timer. So 4 minutes again to really think through where does your strength lie based on your development and growth and your execution. And I'll actually go back to Tony again based on your suggestion. About 30-ish more seconds. You don't have to fill out the entire, just want to give you opportunity. Oh. Okay. So opening again the opportunity to share based on where you are, where do you think your strengths really lie in terms of development and in terms of your cultural wealth? So just giving the floor for anyone who wants to share. Oh, sorry. From a leadership perspective, we really want to think through, I've thought through keeping true and resilient and listening with the empathetic ear, sorry. But there's my accent, empathetic ear. So really thinking through what are the unique contributions from a leadership perspective? And again, the unique contributions from anything based on your wealth. I picked this because a lot of the research participants that I had at the time, you can clearly see the leadership that they bought because they were keeping true and resilient. You talked about resilience, Tracy. From a resilience perspective, that showed up in their leadership. Really listening with an empathetic ear. You talked about Sahara of navigating different spaces and really thinking through how you think and how you relate to people from having an empathetic ear. And that also shows up in a linguistic wealth perspective. Some other places that wealth often shows up, but not always something that you want to capture, but you can capture this as well. It's unique perspectives. We all have a different place that we come from. So really thinking through our unique perspectives on contributions to innovations and the unique cultural identity and thoughts that we bring to the different aspects of our execution. And then cultural humility. This came up a lot from, depending on what cultures I was speaking to at different times. From a cultural humility perspective, learning across cultures is a huge aspect of linguistic capital and seeking different perspectives. So teammates use this as a way in which they have laid the foundations to get into where they were by seeking different perspectives and opinions, by understanding multiple perspectives that were brought to the table. They're huge collaborators in moving forward. And so they've used this wealth and even harnessed this wealth moving forward because they've had that base foundation and development and growth based on where they were in their background. Any questions here? So again, this is going to be our last activity today, is really capturing your unique wealth and contributions. So based on where you have your cultural wealth, based on where your background, your development, you have your cultural wealth, what contributions can you see in yourselves that you can enter and provide value to in the different places in which you execute and grow? I do want to share one more example in the unique contributions. I spoke to teammates that because of their different backgrounds, like they worked for Coca-Cola, and so they were able to help with advertising the Coca-Cola at the time because of the unique contribution in that space. So even in IRPIC, where do you show up and can you provide unique contributions and unique perspectives? Again, it doesn't have to be on this list. This is an example of some things that show up because of cultural wealth, but you're really thinking through what you provide based on the cultural wealth that you possess. To give you a few moments for that. And you might just have one or two that you really want to focus on, you really want to harness. From an execution perspective, like these things I know about myself, these things I have a wealth in, and I really want to harness this to move forward in my execution. You don't have to have 3 or 4, it could just be 1 or 2. Oh, Sahara, you have a question?
Just wondering, when exactly do you want us to share?
Oh, okay. Actually, this doesn't have a sharing portion, but I would love for you to share. So just give me like 30 more seconds and then we'll have a sharing portion then. So awesome. Thank you. I enjoy having conversations in activities. I think people learn from each other so much more than if we did silos. So thank you. So give me 30 seconds and then yes. Okay, so that felt like 30 seconds. So I'll call it 30 seconds. So Sarah, go ahead. Let me sure. So again, from a execution perspective, there's no reason to have a conversation with some commitment to action. So exercise 4, something you'll do on your own, is really through thinking through what you're committing to and what you're committing to your action going forward. So what will you do differently now based on the knowledge that you have today, based on the wealth that you know you have? We all possess wealth in some aspect, and we all possess excellence in some aspects. So what will you do differently based on the wealth you have, based on what you bring to the table and your unique contributions, and based on how you can move forward? And really thinking through, I will do X, Y, Z by this date through these activities. Those make changes. So really, I know your journal, you have space. So as you move forward, capture them this evening, capture them tomorrow, capture them sometime, but make sure you capture them and write them into existence of what you plan to do to make a lasting impact. So I'll recap with our primary goals today. By the end of the session, you'll be able to understand our foundations and system shaping our development. I promise you that we'll go through some aspect of those. And I also promise that we'll explore cultural wealth possessed within and the capabilities, examine our winning capabilities from what we've developed and what we know, and really thinking through and develop our action-oriented plan for embracing our unique strengths. So we went through a couple of different exercises to really shape through from a development perspective, what wealth do we possess and what wealth can we bring and what uniqueness can we bring forward in our execution? And then really thinking through how are we going to use this wealth going forward, how we're going to harness this wealth, and the strengths that you don't even have, or the wealth that you don't possess. Do you want to explore that some more so you could be a well-rounded, well, I wouldn't even say well-rounded, so you could be more well-rounded in how you show up and what you bring to the table. Thank you again for having me. Thank you for the invitation. It is always a pleasure to have some conversation around how we can develop and grow. I have a doctorate in education, so I love learning. It's part of who we are as learners. We really want to think through what we do and how we share and really think through. This is one of my absolute favorite quotes, and you could tell by now I love quotes. It always seems impossible until it gets done. So Nelson Mandela said that it always seems impossible until it gets done. So really, whatever you want to put into existence, might seem impossible now, but when you go through it and when you execute to it, it will get done. So thank you again for having me. Oh, and my QRC code's at the bottom. I do want to say the top one is for any information you want to share, any thoughts you want to share. It's a form. Any thoughts you want to share, anything you want to reflect on, anything you want to connect to with me about, I'm always willing to connect. Any thoughts you want to share in general, that's the top QRC code. And then the bottom QRC code is connecting to my business website. So if you want to connect for some reason, I'm always willing to learn and share. If something struck a chord with you and you're like, oh, have you thought about this? Have you researched this? I am happy to go research something else as well. I'm open to thoughts and feedback. So thank you again for having me.